Hello, brothers and sisters. Raven here to go into a topic that is a personal favorite of mine. Over the past 6-7 years, I have been doing a lot of restudying of Scripture. Basically, I realized I really need to look at it for myself. And as I did, there have been several books that I've found I focus on more than any other. I have been going through the whole Bible, getting everything multiple times. But in the Old Testament, there are three in particular that I went through again and again. Ecclesiastes, Psalms, and Job. So lately, reading through more of only two choices, when he came to a point where he was talking about Job, it really got my attention and got me frustrated. There are two things I've mentioned before. One is the way he seems to always go after a certain way of looking at a passage, whether by a certain translation, rewording it, whatever it may be, so that it fits what he wants to say. The second thing, and this is what's big, is how often I'd hear him say something like an elementary teacher coming to a class and saying, you get $2, then you get $2 more, you'll have $4. So see, 2 plus 2 equals -4. As I've said this before, that makes no sense. I used this example in a previous video to show this is the way he often goes with his argument. I've had too many times it made no sense, then it did. Because I came to look at it through a lens of a weird belief they had. And when he went into Job, I was able to find an example of this that I can really go into, really look at, because this is a book I've studied more than most. The other reason I'm doing this is because of something I read after, because I was thinking, this is a general concept I've already gone through. But then I read this. This was just after the part I'm going to go through. I have, as I said, condensed, simplified, summarized, and paraphrased the story. But this certainly portrays the essentials of what happened. Please read it yourself and see. So, I read it for myself. And it is not at all what I saw. At the start of this section, chapter, I don't know what you want to call it, is a paragraph that I'm going to go through. And I'm looking at the whole paragraph, so it's a bit of a long quote, but we'll go through it a bit at a time. Pages 35 and 36, he starts off with this. You probably know all or part of the remarkable story of Job. Many of those familiar with the story like best the seeming conflict Job has about the justice of his suffering and how it appears to call into question the role God plays in evil, what theologians call theodicy. But some even know how Satan came to God and said to him in effect, and I paraphrase and summarize. Now, first time I've said this, and it's interesting finally to be able to say this, but this is something I can appreciate. He is finally coming out and saying, yes, he is paraphrasing and he is summarizing. However, that's not what I see. You can go and you can quote straight from Scripture and have it just as long or even shorter than this. What he gives here is not simplifying this. It's not summarizing it. It's doing just a different way of saying it, or in my opinion, changing it, even in what it says. So let's look at it. Here's what he's saying Satan said to God. If you will just tear down this hedge around Job and turn me loose on him, if you let me make him suffer, if you will let me kill his wife and children. Note, really quick. There's more important stuff in this, but I want to point out right here, this was the first point where I could see he's not taking this correctly. He says, if you will let me kill his wife and children. When it happens, Satan does not touch Job's wife. God doesn't even tell him not to. Satan only goes after his children. There's a lot I could say about that, but I'm not going to go into details of my view of this book, even though I'm tempted. I might go over a little bit of it at the end of how I view it, but only to make a point. But for now, I'm just going to stick with what he's talking about. So this is not quite right. If he had just said, if you will let me kill his children, then yeah, I could see this fitting. And his wife, no. His wife had nothing to do with it. So when I read that, I was very wary of the next part of it, and the end of it is just way off. So, continuing. If you will let me kill his wife and children, destroy his health and all his possessions, then I'll show you whose power is greater. That is not at all what it's about. Satan never says anything like that, and that's never what he's getting at. I'll go into it later, but like he said, he's paraphrasing and summarizing, but I think he's changing it, and that's where I think he's really making a change. That's something that's not there. Continuing on, Satan claimed, in short, that the only reason Job served God was because God protected the man. Yes, that's it. That's his point. Not that he's greater, but that Job only served for this reason. He just kind of contradicted himself. Satan's main point was that Job didn't serve God because of love, which is God's own self-avowed power, a power that Satan viewed as puny and meaningless. No. Know what he says here in parentheses. Love to Satan is merely a delusion that he knows only as lust. No. Satan is a fool, but he's not an idiot. Satan originated under God's service in heaven. He was the highest of God's angels. He was a cherub at God's throne. Satan knows God's power better than we do. Satan knows God's love better than we do. Because he was there and he experienced it. He was directly with God at his throne. Satan is a fool, but he's not an idiot. So one thing that bothers me in this is that he seems to put Satan in this image of just being this foolish idiot that's got no clue what he's doing. Not at all. We should not let our guard down. And I don't think Satan was trying to make any point about God's power of love. No, not at all. And I'll show more of that in a bit, continuing from where we left off. Rather, Satan insisted that Job served God only because God protected him from harm and gave him lots of wealth, possessions, pleasurable relationships, and fulfilled ambitions. Yes, that's what it's about. If that is what he sees as God's love, that tells me Blair Adams is the one who's got a bad view of what love is. Blessing itself is not love. It can come out of love, but it's not the only thing. And Satan believed he could prove what he said if God would let him bedevil Job. Now here's what really got me. Satan was saying to God, I'll prove your puny love impotent in the face of my brute force with all its weapons of destruction, pain, and death. Satan is not that stupid. He does not see it as puny. And in this, he's not testing God's love, he's testing Job's. That doesn't seem to make sense. He's contradicting himself in this. Unless Blair Adams believes what I keep telling you, and what I've had confirmation of. He now sees the church, or I should say, church leadership, as Christ. Sees them as having his authority. So, the only way I can make sense out of this is if he's saying they're one and the same. That Job has God's love. That Job's love is equal to God's, etc. Which is way off, which means either he's contradicting or he's got a lot of heresy in what he's teaching. But let's look at the passage he gives in reference for this whole statement. Job 1, 6-12. And I'm going to the New King James again because I've heard that's the main version they tell them to use there. In the quote, he doesn't give which version. I'm going to go with this one because this is the one I hear they use most often. Now, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" His first error in what he says is this idea that Satan comes to challenge God. Both the conversation and the challenge is initiated by God, not by Satan. Now, watch how Satan answers. Pay close attention to this, because there are many problems with what he says, Satan said, compared to this. So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you." Stop for a minute. According to Blair Adams, what Satan was saying was, "I'll show you whose power is greater." But note how Satan approaches it. Stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. Satan challenges is not what he's going to do, but what God is going to do. And God lets him try it. And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. As with what he said before about his wife and children, God said, all that he has is in your power. Satan kills his children, but he doesn't touch his wife. She comes in later. Kind of strange. The only thing he can lay his hands on is Job. At first. This was not about Satan coming to challenge God. This was about God challenging Satan. This was not about challenging God's love. This wasn't even necessarily about challenging Job's love. In part, it was about his love for God, but primarily, it was about his loyalty, his faith, his fear. For most of it, Satan fails. Job stays loyal for the most part, except near the end. Now, I'm going to bring up something I noticed, a way I like to look at it. I'm not going to say this is it, and it is certainly not the main point of the book, because if it was, it would have been made clearer. But it is something I noticed in it that got me. And I've seen this theme in other places in Scripture. So I have my own way of looking at this conversation with God and Satan. Not in what they say, but in what's going on that we don't see. We don't know the tone. We don't know how their expressions are, etc. We only know the words they use. And to me, it seemed a little odd. I think it's a little odd how Satan goes from saying, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it, to God saying, have you considered my servant Job? It seems to kind of come out of left field. A little off topic. However, looking at it again, I realized, why would God need to ask, from where do you come? He already knows. Then I realized Satan's reaction is probably a sarcastic remark. He's probably saying, I've been here and there, just as a joke, saying, you know where I've been. But then God's next question still seems out of place, unless it has something to do with where Satan's been. He says, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? I wonder if God's mocking Satan because Satan's been trying to make Job turn away from God and failing. If that's the case, with what Satan says, where he says, stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, I think he's fully admitting power of God. He's only challenging Job. So why does God do this? I mean, either way, God is the one who starts this. God is the one who really brings up the topic of Job. Why? I think the answer is in a place nobody ever told me about. I never knew about until I read it for myself. One thing I always heard about was how Job's 3 friends were trying to convince him God was bringing judgment on him, or he should curse God, that kind of thing. But I'd never heard there was a 4th. Then I finally read it, and I got to chapter 32. Here's what happens. So these 3 men ceased answering Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then the wrath of Elihu, the son of Bereshel the Buzite, of the family of Ram, was aroused against Job. His wrath was aroused because he justified himself rather than God. Also against his 3 friends his wrath was aroused, because they had found no answer, and yet had condemned Job. Now because they were years older than he, Elihu had waited to speak to Job. When Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these 3 men, his wrath was aroused. So Elihu, the son of Bereshel the Buzite, answered and said, I am young in years, and you are very old. Therefore I was afraid, and dared not declare my opinion to you. I said, age should speak, and multitude of years should teach wisdom. If there is a spirit in man, the breath of the Almighty gives him understanding. Great men are not always wise, nor do the aged always understand justice. When I read this, it really spoke to me, because this was a mistake I'd made for so long. Part of the reason I'd never read this for myself was because I treated myself as too young or too unversed in Scripture, and I always had to rely on those above me. It wasn't until I started to finally look at things for myself to find out what I believed that I noticed. That is part of why I do this. I don't think your wisdom, as he says, or your age, decides whether or not you can speak. I think it's still good that he let them speak first, but it's also very good that he did speak up. Because in the next few chapters, he's all about trusting God, putting faith in God, glorifying God. What they should have all been saying. But this, I feel, was what God was trying to show Satan. Now, I'm not saying that's the point of the book. I still think the whole point of the book is simply about putting trust in God no matter what. Because otherwise, I think this would be clarified more. But what I think made God start the challenge, I don't know, but this is my guess based on how this happens. And right after Elihu says this, God speaks. I think he was waiting for Elihu to speak up. Because I think God was trying to prove something to Satan. Not his love, something else. Because Satan was going after Job. Because Job was the strongest. The most loyal. I think Satan felt like, take him down. He can take down anything. I think what God was doing was using the weakest, the youngest, the least knowledgeable, to show Satan that, just as Paul says, his weakness is his strength. Was love a part of this? Pretty much everything if God's involved. But it was not the point. It was not the primary theme. And it certainly was not a challenge of God's love. Love for God was a part of it, but it was mainly about faith, trust, loyalty, and fear. God showed the strongest man had a weakness, but he also showed the weakest man he could use. He has no limits. I felt like I had to put this together because this is something that comes up again and again and again. He keeps contradicting himself. And either you have a paradox in what he's saying, or there's something under the surface he's not telling you directly. At one point he says God's being challenged, at the next he'll say Job's being challenged. Or he's treating them the same. You disagree? Fine. If you want to go ahead and maybe make an argument, give your own perspective, wouldn't mind hearing it. If you want to solely rebuke, okay, but I'm not going to hear it. So just so you know, it's a waste of time. I'm not responding. But for those of you who really have questions, really aren't sure of what I'm saying, or worried about something, please let me know. But think through it for yourself. Do as I had to do. Read it, look at it, see what it says, not what either I or Blair Adams say about it. Because like I said, the way I view it, as I just shared, can't say for certain because it doesn't clarify. So go look at it for yourself. Instead, I'll say what he said. I'm going to read the quote again, but I'm going to end it differently. I have, as I said, condensed, simplified, summarized, and paraphrased the story, but this certainly portrays the essentials of what happened. This part I'm going to read differently. Instead of, please read it for yourself and see, I'll say this. Please read it for yourself and let God show. God bless.